All rise, we would have.
Molim, ustanite.
The International Residual Mechanism for Criminal
Međunarodni krivični mehanizam zasjeda.
Excessi la function residual the tribunal penal et uet. Please be seated.
Izvolite sjesti.
Good morning to everyone, Mr.
Dobro jutro svima, molim da se najavi predmet. Dobro jutro, časni sude, ovo je predmet MICT-15-96-T, tužilac protiv Jovice Stanišića i Franka Simatovića. It has been rectified.
I was not getting English on my, it's been rectified. May we have the appearances, please?
Good morning, Mr. President, and Your Honor, Judge Park for the prosecution, Douglas Stringer with Grace Harbor, Earl Sullivan, and Tomalo Zhao.
Good morning, Your Honours. For Mr. Stanišic, myself, Wayne Jordash, Joe Holmes, and Luke Breitbart.
Dobro jutro, časni.
Good morning, Your Honors. For the Simatovic defense, Melanie Vranješ, Vladimir Petrovic, and myself, Mihailo Bakrač.
Before we begin with hearing the prosecution's arguments and rebuttal, I note for the record that the Chamber is sitting today pursuant to Rule 19A in the absence of Judge Masanche, who for urgent personal non-medical reasons is unable to sit with us today. In addition, as communicated to the parties yesterday, the Chamber has decided to grant the Stanišic defense an additional half an hour in connection with the presentation of its rejoinder arguments. Should there be a need, the Chamber will grant a limited additional time to the prosecution and the defense teams for final remarks prior to concluding today's hearing. Accordingly, the Chamber will sit an extra session this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. President. These are the prosecution rebuttal submissions. Yesterday, the Stanišic defense accused the prosecution of not having considered the Burgeonin Appeals Chamber test that requires a procurement link between Stanišic and his alleged tools. This is page 2 of the transcript, stating that, quote, of course the prosecution don't use the word procure. Transcript page 9. Your Honors, neither does the Burgeonin Appeals Chamber. Not once in that entire appeals judgment does the word procurement or procure appear. We have a slide on this. What I'd like to do is read for Your Honors the relevant part from the Burgeonin Appeals judgment that Stanišic has cited in his brief and that he's referred to repeatedly in his submissions yesterday. The Burgeonin Appeals judgment says that, quote, to hold a member of a JCE responsible for crimes committed by non-members of the enterprise, it has to be shown that the crime can be imputed to one member of the joint criminal enterprise, and that this member, when using a principal perpetrator, acted in accordance with the common plan. The existence of this link is a matter to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. The word procure was used in the Krajisnik trial judgment at paragraph 883 and 1082 and 1086. However, the Krajisnik Appeals Chamber, and that's in its appeals judgment at paragraph 236, confirmed that this language was not a new test and does not require any enhanced level of proof, stating that, quote, this standard corresponds in substance to the standard outlined in the Burgeonin appeals judgment. As set out in detail in the prosecution brief, the evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that the accused and the other JCE members used the principal perpetrators to commit the crimes. For example, in its final trial brief, section 2D, this section of the prosecution brief is entitled, quote, Stanišic and Simatovic contributed to the CCP using key Serbian DB assets and units who they controlled. Your Honors, this is the correct standard, and Stanisic's preference for the word procured does not require proof of any higher linkage between JCE members and their tools. Yesterday, at transcript pages 3 and 4, Stanišic claims that the prosecution abandoned the criminal purpose, asserting that the common criminal plan was premised on unification of Croatian and Bosnian Serb territories, referring yet again to the term Greater Serbia as Milosevic's objective. We dealt with this already on Monday in our submissions. We directed the Chamber to paragraph 13 of the indictment setting out the CCP, which Stanišic continues to ignore. The prosecution's case regarding the common criminal purpose has never changed. What did change is the scale of Milosevic's grand vision. Stanisic's own witness, Sir Ivor Roberts, said it best, quote, as I said, his, Milosevic's, aim had been to be the new Tito, referring here to the post-World War II leader of Yugoslavia. The new Tito of Slovenia, Croatia, everywhere. That didn't happen. Sir Ivor continues. He, Milosevic, kept on having to scale back his ambitions till he realized that the limit of his power would be in Serbia itself by the end of the whole exercise. The fact that Milosevic failed to become the new Tito does not undermine the prosecution case in the least. The evidence does establish that Milosevic, with the steadfast support and contributions from Stanišic, Simatovic, and their fellow JCE members, succeeded in their objective to establish Serb territories, statelets, to use Sir Ivor's word, in Croatia and Bosnia through the violent removal of non-Serbs. That is what matters. That is the common criminal purpose that was charged and which in our submission, Your Honors, is proved. It has not changed. On the evidence of Sir Ivor Roberts alone, the Chamber would be well along to making a finding that Slobodan Milosevic was a member of this joint criminal enterprise. We quoted Roberts' evidence on Monday, stating that Milosevic's nationalist agenda had assured the breakup of Yugoslavia would be violent and bloody. Roberts stated, moreover, quote, Milosevic accepted ethnic cleansing in his support of Bosnian Serbs because it enabled him to hold on to power. It's the transcript of his testimony on the 15th of October, 2019 at page 24. Not surprisingly, Stanišic has not referred once in their closing submissions to Sir Ivor Roberts and his evidence, even though he was their own witness. His evidence about Milosevic's acceptance of ethnic cleansing, of Milosevic's total control over the Serbian MUP, his evidence that Archon was a member or a unit of the Serbian state security, Stanišic will not engage any of that evidence. How could Stanišic serve Milosevic's interests and policies so thoroughly and capably throughout the entirety of the CCP without sharing and supporting Milosevic's embrace of ethnic cleansing? The answer is that he could not. Simatovic, for his part, agrees that Milosevic was a, quote, key participant, close quote, in the JCE, although he argues that he had no real contact with Milosevic prior to the May 1997 speech at the Kostic Center. That's from Tuesday's transcript yesterday at page 71. Without question, Slobodan Milosevic is a key member of this joint criminal enterprise. Who else? Stanišic characterizes Bogdanovic, Arkan, and Baja as a, quote, power triumvirate in the SBWS that was all-consuming and encompassing, end quote, his brief at 643, effectively conceding they are members of the JCE. Stanišic agrees that the Bosnian Serb leadership implemented a common criminal plan in Bosnia-Herzegovina beginning in March and April of 1992. This, of course, is Karadzic, Krajisnik, Mladic, and the others. In his submissions yesterday, at page 36, Stanišic asserts that Serbian DB operatives Kojic and Kostic were working to combat crime in the SBWS. But the problem was the JNA, Hadzic, and Martic. So now we see Hadzic, Martic, and the responsible officials of the JNA were all in the joint criminal enterprise. Of course they were. At page 29 and 30 of yesterday's transcript, Stanišic points to Kertész as organizing weapon supplies, attempting to deflect from his own involvement in this. And so what we learn from Stanišic is that throughout 1991 to 1995, he was surrounded by members of the very JCE that he admits was being implemented in Croatia and in Bosnia. Slobodan Milosevic, Bogdanovic, Kertész, Baja, Arkan, Karadzic, Krajisnik, Mladic, Martic, Hadzic, and the others. All are JCE members, but he is not. Your Honors, consider the totality of the evidence, consider the actions and words of Jovica Stanišic throughout the 4-year period of the CCP. We ask the Chamber to consider the consistent presence and contributions of Stanišic and his Serbian DB as the crimes unfolded year after year. Consider the actions and contributions of Stanisic's subordinates, Simatovic, and the unit members like Bozovic, Miovic, and the others. We ask the Chamber to consider Stanisic's unflagging support and dedication to serving the policies and interests of his superior, Slobodan Milosevic, who, as his own witness tells us, advanced violent ethnic cleansing and the establishment of ethnically pure Serbian territories abroad. Stanisic's attempt to insulate himself from all of them fails utterly. The failed attempt to lay the blame off on everyone around him doesn't end there. In his submissions yesterday, Stanišic continues to blame Franko Simatovic and others in the Serbian DB for actions he claims were undertaken without his knowledge or approval. I mentioned this yesterday in our submissions on Monday. I mentioned this in our submissions on Monday. At transcript page 62 yesterday, Stanišic blames Simatovic for the redeployment of the criminals Cerny, Lugar, and Debeli to Bosanski Shamac. It's at transcript page generic and 40 and 41. He charges the prosecution with making, quote, wild allegations of de jure authority, end quote, in connection with the prosecution's assertion that Stanišic dispatched Simatovic to establish the Golubic camp in the Krajina. Stanišic asserts, quote, "The prosecution expect the de jure status to do such heavy lifting, neglecting to establish a working relationship. And this is no more apparent than in April to August of 1991 in Croatia in relation to Simatovic." How desperate to now claim that Simatovic was on a frolic, setting up Golubic, training Krajina police, recruiting Captain Dragon, all without Stanisic's knowledge or approval. The prosecution does not need to make wild accusations about Stanisic's knowledge and approval of the activities of his subordinate and his co-accused, Franko Simatovic. The chamber need only consider Simatovic's own submissions themselves from yesterday. This is at page 72 of yesterday's transcript, when Simatovic submitted, quote, "For the Serbian DB's operation from 1991 to 1995, we can clearly say that it was defined by respect for hierarchy, operation in accordance with the rules, discipline, clear relationships between levels of management. And that applied to everyone from an operative officer to the chief of the service. The very structure of the service and its organization, as well as the way it was controlled and the reporting worked, leave no room whatsoever for any self-willed, independent, or private action within the service at any level. There is not a single piece of evidence that any operative officer or senior officer at any level acted independently, regardless of decisions, reports, and supervision by the SDB management. The Serbian DB is the last institution within the state apparatus where independent and self-willed action could be possible." Now, Your Honors, the prosecution wholeheartedly endorses that characterization. Stanisic's attempts to blame those above him, those around him, and those below him, all of those swirling around him for 4 years of conflict and ethnic cleansing, this effort fails. The inescapable conclusion is that Stanišic is a full-fledged, active, and contributing member to this joint criminal enterprise. Your Honors, beginning at page 95 of yesterday's transcript, Simatovic argued that the speech that he presented during the 1997 Kostic Center ceremony was not true, and that the DB's role was exaggerated. Stanišic calls the Kula speech, quote, "vainglorious nonsense." Transcript page 25. Annex B of the prosecution brief cites extensively to evidence corroborating the relevant aspects of Mr. Simatovic's speech. Simatovic says that the index does not comport with the contents of the speech, but he fails to identify what it is that allegedly does not comport. What matters is that in his presentation to President Milosevic, what he said comports with the evidence. The extensive footnoted annotations in our Annex B prove this. The Simatovic defense say at page 97 yesterday that Dragicevic wrote the Kula speech, but Mr. Dragicevic himself testified that he did not. Moreover, Stanisic's witness, Teodorovic, testified that although he did not have specific knowledge about this speech, based on the rules about reporting outside the DB, including to the president, Stanišic would have been required to approve the speech beforehand. We could please bring up a slide. Not only did Stanišic necessarily approve Simatovic's speech, as he was duty-bound to do, but when he later awarded and applauded his unit, Milosevic had already left the room. This belies any claim that this ceremony was just a show for Milosevic. Stanisic's warm embrace of Captain Dragan, as depicted on this slide, stood out among his greetings from the other unit members he was awarding, a physical demonstration of their close relationship. Your honors will see this in the video. Speaking of Captain Dragan, the Simatovic defense yesterday argued, transcript page 100, that the only conclusion that could be drawn from the Captain Dragan interview shown on Monday was that Simatovic had been in touch before Captain Dragan went to Kinin. Let us play another clip from this interview. The interpreters should have the transcripts.
During this period,
A onda se kapetan Dragan u jednom od cikličnih članu Markića. Babić se žalio.
Babić complained to Milosevic and bothered him with it until Frankie called Captain Dragan. Captain Dragan, he told me that the boss wanted to see me in Belgrade. Actually, Jovica came to me and told me literally that I could not go back to Krajina. I asked him why. He told me that I could not see certain things from my position, which can be seen from a higher position.
Your Honors, this refers to the events in August of 1991. It's confirmed by Stanišic himself in his suspect interview, Exhibit P3779, as we said on Monday. It also confirms that Stanišic was operationally active during this period in 1991, as we also said on Monday. In August of 1991, the accused moved Captain Dragan from Kinin to Belgrade. They had authority over him. Stanišic was his boss in a higher position. There's no doubt that the accused had employed Captain Dragan. Our next point, Your Honors, is this. Yesterday at transcript page 120 and 121, Simatovic highlighted evidence that the Scorpions were directly subordinated to the SVK, that's the Armed Forces of the Republic of the Serbian Krajina, to the SVK 11th Corps Commander General Lončar, and that he, or RSK Minister of Defense Murgud, deployed the Scorpions into the Turnovo operation. If we could have the next slide, please. Your Honors, on the slide you see an excerpt of an interview that Murgud gave to the press after testifying in the Scorpions trial in Belgrade. He said, "I also knew Stanišic well, but since he's being tried in The Hague, I don't want to go into details." This is Exhibit 2D00106, page 2. If we could please go into private session, Mr. President.
Private session?
We have a moment, Your Honor.
Back in open session.
The evidence that the Scorpions were deployed by the SVK is only half the story. Although the order officially came through Murgood and General Lonchar, as Stoperic testified, quote, the State Security Service from Belgrade decided on the when, where, and how, and Lonchar's order was just a formality. This is at paragraph 646 of our brief, Your Honors. Moreover, the contemporaneous documents are unequivocal that in the summer of 1991, the Serbian DB took over the SVK 11th Corps completely. Sorry, I meant to say summer of 1995. An SVK 11th Corps Security Organ report from 28th of August 1995, that's Exhibit 3090, confirms that whatever the relationship with the SVK, the accused ultimately controlled the Scorpions' assignments. Per this report, and as explained by the defense witness Mladen Karan, who authored the report, Božović and other members of the unit took over the command of the SVK security organs and provided the Scorpions, the so-called Bozo squad, to escort the SVK officials out of town. The security organ reported on the 30th of October 1995 that, quote, the Serbia state security is in charge now. Frankie, Jovica, Lonchar is nothing but a pawn now. This is P817, page 1. Yesterday, Simatovic claimed that Stoperic's evidence was unreliable because Prosecutor Groom had tried to influence his evidence during the ICTY trial. At best, this is a misrepresentation of the facts, and it also beggars belief to suggest that Mr. Groom would try to inappropriately influence a witness's evidence. If the Simatovic defense genuinely believed that Mr. Groom had inappropriately influenced Stoperic's testimony, which is what they're alleging at paragraphs 1368, 1389 of their brief, they should have cross-examined Stoperic on this issue when he testified before Your Honors in this trial. And they did not do that. Simatovic only makes this claim now at the 11th hour of this trial. And the fact that he does so at this 11th hour demonstrates that there is, in fact, no substance to this accusation of improper influence. This does not in any way impact the credibility of the witness Goran Stoperic. According to Stanišic, there was a network of VJ or JNA training camps serving Croatia, which trained thousands of men. But, quote, these camps had nothing to do with Stanišic, end quote. This is counsel's assertion yesterday, transcript page 45. It is not the prosecution's case that Stanišic had anything to do with camps of the VJ or JNA, but rather, and it's set out comprehensively in section 2E4 of the prosecution brief, Stanišic, together with Simatovic and unit members under their authority, founded a network of their own Serbian DB training camps across the SAO Krajina, SBWS, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in Serbia. It's our brief at 266. Of course, it's, quote, not logical, end quote, to borrow Stanisic's words, transcript page 43, that a Serbian DB chief who was sticking to his official duties would be running training camps, training Serb forces for ethnic cleansing campaigns. But Stanišic was acting well beyond his official competency, as we've described extensively. And in this context, it was perfectly logical that he would and did establish training camps for this purpose. And in fact, his camps were so effective once he got started that he replicated them proximate, near to ethnic cleansing targets all over Croatia and Bosnia throughout the indictment period. Nor is it, quote, logical, end quote, that Stanišic would proudly show Milosevic a map marking all the unit's training camps during the Kostic Center ceremony if he had no involvement in their operation. Your Honor saw this slide earlier in Ms. Harbour's presentation. As you can see from the slide, this is precisely what Stanišic did. This is P-256. The evidence establishes overwhelmingly the existence of these DB training camps in Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia as well. Pointing them out proudly to Milosevic, as we see here, makes clear that these camps were no frolic of Simatovic, Filipovic, and all the other DB personnel who worked in them. What we see in these photographs is Stanišic proudly taking credit for one of his and Simatovic's significant contributions to the common criminal plan that he now admits was implemented in Croatia and in Bosnia. Stanišic yesterday at transcript page 44 said there is no training base in Kornica, and it was, quote, really at best, end quote, a DB camp, a short-term stay for men associated with Simatovic, including Fica. That's Dragan Filipovic, whom the Chamber's been hearing about this week. In addition to the evidence detailed in paragraph 278 of our brief, Your Honors, Stanisic's claim is plainly disproven by P-3417, which you'll see on this slide. It's a statement of Nedeljko Orlic, P-03417, page 2, in which he states, quote, I immediately went to Kornica, that is the camp, Borje, with 5 men where I stayed for a 3-month course. Training on rocket launcher, training inspectors were Frankie and Fico, end quote. Not only is it evident from this document that there was a training camp at Kornica, but also that Simatovic and Filipovic were instructors there. And of course, they were on no frolic. I refer Your Honors to row 50, B50 of the prosecution's amended evidence table circulated yesterday, noting the typographical error in the date that's referred to here. Moreover, Your Honors, it is abundantly clear from the prosecution's brief and submissions on Monday that, contrary to Stanisic's assertion at page 46 of yesterday's testimony or submissions, the activity in these camps, in fact, had everything to do with military activity in Croatia and beyond. Moving now to the next item. Yesterday, Your Honors, Mr. Simatovic attempted to minimize his links to Mladic and Karadzic. This is at transcript pages 87 and 88. In fact, in the second of the 2 conversations he mentioned, this is in P-2793, a 28th January 1992 conversation between Karadzic and Kertész. Kertész described Simatovic to Karadzic as a, quote, friend of ours, close quote. And shortly thereafter as, quote, your friend, close quote. That's at page 6 of the exhibit. After telling Karadzic, quote, I am behind you, close quote, Simatovic assured Karadzic, you're the man there, doctor. You're the main man there. And that's how it stays. Simatovic confirmed that they would meet as soon as Karadzic arrived in Belgrade. This is the exhibit, page 8. Not the conversation of 2 people who did not recognize each other, as Simatovic's counsel suggested yesterday. Simatovic indeed met with Karadzic in Belgrade later that spring, when he attended a meeting at the Bosanska Villa, where they and the other attendees, who included Krajisnik, Micho Stanišic, and Archon, coordinated tasks within their respective areas of competence. Simatovic met with Mladic twice more in his Eastern Bosnia deployment, planning the operation to take Srebrenica in March of 1993. The operation that was called off at the last minute, as we described in our submissions on Monday. It's in paragraphs 585, 586 of our brief. The next item relates to Western Srem and the activities of the Serbian DB unit in that region in late 1991. I'm going to show a slide now of P00261, page 5. This is from the personnel file of Dragan Oluic at page 5, as I said. As a member of this unit, he says, I took part in the following battles: Ljubovo, Plitvice, Glina, Kostanica, in the area of northern Dalmatia. In September 1991, I was involved in capturing Babska and Sharongrad, or rather, Pajos. Your Honors, this excerpt of the personnel file of the unit member Dragan Olivic is in contrast to Stanisic's argument yesterday, transcript page 48, in which he argued that there is no evidence that during its operation in Western Srem, the unit successfully captured the village of Babska and the nearby facility at Pajos. Dragan Oluic is one of Stanisic's accepted, quote, nascent unit, so-called nascent unit members, meaning that he was one of the 28 men referred to in the evidence cited at footnote 92 of Stanisic's brief. In his personnel file, he states, in September of 1991, I was involved in capturing Babska and Sarangrad, or rather Pajos, as we've just seen. The next issue for our rebuttal, Your Honors, is this. Stanišic yesterday and throughout his brief referred to RFJ 137's evidence to support his nascent unit theory and to deny responsibility for crimes committed by the unit. This came up in particular in regard to his evidence on the absence of civilians or crimes during the unit's operations in Western Srem. It's page 48 of the transcript. We go please in the private session.
Private session?
Your Honors, there is much in this witness's evidence that the Chamber can rely on. However, in light of his professed bias in favor of the accused and his fellow unit members, as well as his own personal interest in denying crimes committed by the unit, the Chamber must weigh his evidence accordingly and consider with caution his denials of crimes by unit members. Such an assertion certainly runs contrary to the weight of all the evidence that implicates the unit and its members in crimes throughout the period of the common criminal purpose. This will be our last item, Mr. President, for rebuttal. Transcript page 107 to 111. Simatovic describes the role of the Serbian Minister of Defense, Simovic, and Bjorčević from the JNA in providing arms and other material to the Serbian Volunteer Guard. That Serbia's Ministry of Defense played this role is not disputed. However, critically, the evidence clearly establishes that Archon was placed into Baja's TO, not the JNA. This positioned the Serbian volunteer guard in the line of the Serbian MUP through Baja and ultimately answerable to the accused. This is set out in our brief, paragraph 400. The fact that Archon and the SDG received arms and assistance from multiple sources does not change who it was that was responsible for the SDG's deployments, who was responsible to make sure that Archon could continue his crimes unhindered under Operation Thompson, as we've discussed. And as the evidence shows, Your Honors, Exhibit P333 tells us that Mr. Simatovic was no longer the minister of the Serbian Ministry of Defense by January of 1992. In any event, over the years, as the common criminal purpose continued, Archon's place under the Serbian MUP was a constant, and in the evidence we have presented, it shows that the accused continued to deploy the SDG in Bosnia in 1992. And by 1994, Your Honors, as we've seen, through the end of the combat activities in this case, the SDG were on the JATD's payroll, that is the payroll of the Serbian state security. Thank you, Your Honors. Those are the prosecution rebuttal submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Mr. Jordash?
Your Honor, I had hoped that we would have a break at this point, just so I could organise the material. I can start if Your Honours prefer, but...
Very well, we take the break now and resume. In other words, we just shift the time by 15 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honour.
So we'd come back in a half hour.
All rise. We will away.